Well, welcome everyone to the Preaching Collective, and we are glad to have a new addition to the Preaching Collective, Amy O'Brien. There she is.
Yeah. Hey, we're gonna get the. I gotta replace these pads and get you like a cheering.
Yeah. So maybe the viewers are wondering if we kicked out John. We did. He his Phillies 76ers lost, and so that's why. No, I'm sorry, John. I'm just kidding.
Hey,
just kidding. No, John. We still want John around, but he's on paternity leave, and we're thankful for that. But also glad to have Amy be part of this, and excited for your input.
Thanks for upgrading us, Amy. Thanks for upgrading us.
We need your help as we look at the Roosevelt Statement of Faith. It's on our website. Check it out as we're talking right now.
RooseveltChurch.org/what-we-believe.
There it is. The sermon series that we're doing this summer is going through a certain, we're going to go through all the Statement of Faith, but this Preaching Collective is just looking at a couple of them and just seeing what we can see in anticipation, looking ahead towards what we'll do together as a whole church. The one we're going to do today is the restoration of all things, the last paragraph. Nice. This is a good one. And I think to encourage, if you haven't read it, pause the video right now, read it over. Now, welcome back. Let's start off with one of the first things that's mentioned here in the statement in that particular part of the Statement of Faith, that we believe that Jesus is coming back. Why is that important? I do feel as if maybe it's because of the dispensational fundamentalist background I grew up in. It seemed like we talked a lot about Jesus coming back and rapture and all that kind of stuff. And I definitely went through a season decompressing from all that, some of the bad elements of it. But I think there's an element that's good in that. I mean, what do you guys think of? Why do you think that's important? This idea of Jesus coming back.
I'm not speaking at once now.
I know, right?
Help me out, ladies.
Yeah.
Why is it important that Jesus is coming back and we silent crickets?
Is he?
Right.
Do we believe that?
So.
Yeah,
Yes,
I hope so.
He's coming back.
So let's start there. Why do you hope so?
Well, I'll say, a couple of things. First, just to be in relationship, to have a, and not that we're not in relationship with God, but have a redeeming relationship where I get to see him face to face. You know, I didn't get to see him walk the earth. I didn't get to see him do it. But then also the redemption of all things. We're looking for that because there's some things that are, a lot of things, almost, lot of things are out of whack. And so it's like we need him to return. We need him to set things back in order. And so, yeah. But also that relationship. I think about, I'll just say this, and then I think about when God would walk with Adam in the cool of the day. Man, I can imagine that. I can imagine that.
Yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm. I do think it's significant and important that we highlight that our faith is belief in the bodily return of Jesus. Yes. Like that. Mm-hmm. I like to tell people Jesus is going to return in time and space and in human history. Your phone might go off. Right? I really think it's going to be whoa, this is for real. Yeah. And that's. I think it's taking seriously what the Bible says that when Jesus showed up bodily in front of people were not expecting that. And it was well, he's really here. The promise the guy of Acts 1 is he's going to return in the same way. In the same way he leaves, the same way he's going to return.
In just the same way that he left, he will return. Which is a little crazy to think about. If you saw a man coming down on the cloud.
Right.
Let's just think about that for a second before because I know we're all talking Bible and man, I'm so happy about the restoration of all things and things ain't right. Yeah. But it's going to be breaking news. Yeah. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, ABC, 1, 2, 3, all of them are going to be yo, did y'all see that guy on a cloud? Was that real? What do we make of it? I feel like the government's going to hide it and be no, that was actually some sort of hovercraft. And again, who knows what technology is going to be around then, to explain it all. Who knows how it's going to affect the dynamic of living, of actual life, because technology is crazy right now. Yeah. And so just to think that he'll come back, and despite whatever technological advances we would have experienced by that time, his coming back is going to disrupt all of that. Jesus will be the disruptor of all time.
Yeah, I love that.
That's pretty wild.
the statement of faith goes on to talk about him coming back as judge, right?
That part.
And that, because, we talk about,
I guess.
let's talk about it. So this is, it's interesting, this particular section. Maybe might argue it's a section that maybe some spaces we don't talk about, or maybe sort of ignore or wrestle with. Yeah. Jesus, part of our statement of faith is believing that Jesus, one of the things Jesus comes back to do is to judge the living and the dead. So that we're stand before the Lord, and statement of faith says the unjust to judgment and eternal conscious punishment in hell, the just to eternal blessedness in the presence of him who sits on the throne in the new heaven and new earth, the home of righteousness. So we do believe in a heaven and hell. I think, and that is part of Orthodox Christianity, right? From the very beginning. It's not a new thing, that the belief in heaven and hell. Now, of course, there's debate on what that means. And so I don't want to dismiss that, but, is that important to speak to? And if so, like, what's the best way to talk about heaven and hell? Would you suggest? I mean, because I want to communicate this. I don't know if I'm preaching this one or not, but whoever's doing it,
somebody is.
It's not Brandon.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, it's Brandon.
He's like, not it.
Well, let me just quickly say this. I do. Maybe I'm showing my cards a little bit. I grew up in a church context that talked a lot about hell, and honestly, I think my first initial prayer to Jesus, I prayed a lot of prayers to believe in Jesus. My first, because I thought that's what I had to do.
Every Sunday for me.
I only learned later I didn't have to keep doing that. But my first initial one was like, I don't want to go to hell. Like,
right.
And a few ones afterwards, like, am I sure? Just in case. I don't want to go to hell. Now, you guys heard me preach and teach. I don't think that's a good motivation for people to believe in Jesus. But is that wrong? It doesn't sound to me that says it's not like, I wonder if sometimes if we go too far in the direction, like there's, maybe push back on me on that, but I feel like hell, the fear of God's righteous judgment is not a bad thing, right?
No.
We should be afraid of it. I mean, we talk with the kids in children's ministry all the time about that God is who he says he is. And a part of that is, he is the king of the universe. He is judge over all things. And so he is love. He is all of that, but he's also judge. And there's also a righteousness that he requires of us. And so, I was thinking before when you asked, why is it important that Jesus is coming back? I think it's important because he said he would.
Yeah.
So, but I think he also says he's this. He also says there's a hell. He also tells us sort of what's required of us. And that's really uncomfortable to wrestle with. But it is true.
Well, let me sort of tease this out, because I do think people sit there and think that sounds unfair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do we sort of...
What sounds unfair?
It sounds unfair that God is sending people to hell as like a forever thing. Like, is there a way in which we need to sort of talk about that, describe that? Why? I mean, I have ways in which I think about it, but before I sort of share that.
I feel like it's similar to the way that you address or deal with election. And so in the same way that you talked about Romans 9 and God's right to choose, I think the same applies to, again, God's right to judge. And it's funny too, because I recall a situation like Cain and Abel, where God says, hey, if you do well, if you do right, will it not go well with you? But if you do not do well, sin is at your door. Sin is crouching at your door. And its desires for you. And so it's not as if Jesus is coming back and people haven't been warned, or there hasn't been some long suffering, right? This is not a situation where, again, I remember God is speaking to Ezekiel, and he's like, do I find pleasure in the wicked man dying? In the wicked man dying, do I find pleasure in? And so I think sometimes people, maybe because of how it's preached, don't really understand God in his full context. And what this actually is. So I do think there's a degree of understanding what heaven and hell is, life with and life without God. And I think C.S. Lewis talks about the way people who end up in an eternity without God are those people who really chose that path, and for their entire lives have said, no, I don't want this. And for those who And again, I think part of it is also our own ego and perception, which is why Jesus is saying, judge lest ye be judged, because I think often we spend a lot of time based on sometimes the way things are preached, that we have the authority to make the assessment as to who is going to be there and who's not going to be there, versus living a life to simply be a faithful witness to really God's kindness and grace in our own lives, such that, when we look at somebody's life and feel like, oh man, they out there in the club all the time, or they out doing whatever and doing this and doing that, we're like, oh, well, you ain't gonna get there. And again, because of the styles of evangelism and whatever, we just think, well, if you ain't living like this, then you're not going to heaven. But I think we've been far mistaken in that regard. And again, I think in the same sense, like the sheep and the goat, I think we'll be surprised at who are sheep and who are goat, just like they were.
Yeah. I wanted to add to that. I think how I understood it. The Bible's clear, like he wishes that no man would perish.
Right.
And what I understood hell to be was this was for God's judgment for the darkness, the princes of, the workers of iniquity and all of that stuff, like this whole unseen darkness where Satan and his fallen angels are just wreaking havoc, and God was coming back to set judgment for them. But in our own hardness of heart, and, like you said, this is looking at God like he wishes that no man would perish. But if it's something that we're doing in our own, or rejecting the truth of God and the free gift of God, and who knows how that all, works in God's sovereignty and how he decides. It could be something that he sees like, I know they're gonna, I don't know that. It's not for me to understand, but it's encouraging to know that, like, okay, no, this is a God who loves, but even in his love, like he has to judge. And I'll say secondly too, with that, I feel like if we continue to go on, like if that's the main focus is just the fire, brimstone, and we're leading with that, then it can be dangerous in that aspect too. So I kind of grew up the same way, and it's like, okay, well, do I completely fear God? Because the Bible's also clear, like perfect love casts off fear, out all fear, and that's fearing punishment. Like, do I fear God because I'm afraid of hell, and this is the only link to God? Is like, well, I don't want to go to hell, so it's like, well, let me just do this, and it's but that's not fully the gospel. But anyway,
that's good. One of you guys said this. I do. You're saying, how did you put it? Like, God is who he is.
Yeah, God is who he says he is.
Yeah.
And that's not always who we wish he was.
Yeah.
I guess.
See, I think I lean hard into that, which is to say that, like, that allows me. I think there's a lot of mystery with this, because I don't want to deny God's sovereignty. I do think he's over all things, but the Bible does seem to say, like, we can be legitimately held responsible for our choices. That I don't think there's anyone in hell. People are in hell because they resisted God and continue to resist God.
Yes.
Right. And so, I look for statements that sort of say stuff about who God is and say, okay, this is true. And no matter, like, however we think of this, like, this is still true, which means that some parts of it, like, we don't understand, but this is still true. So, for example, one of my favorite ones is Deuteronomy 32, verse 4. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness without iniquity, just and upright is he. Yeah. So I often tell people, like, if that's true, that all his ways are justice, that means that includes heaven and hell. Yeah. That means, oftentimes we think, like, when we watch a trial, or like, oh, that wasn't just, like, they forgot to bring in this last minute evidence, or they ignored it, that testimony wasn't heard, right? And that's why, those they got sent, whatever it is. That however we put this together, I believe the Bible is saying, when we sort of stand before God, no one will be able to be like, wait a second, you forgot about Exhibit A here, or Exhibit B, right? Yeah. Right. That, in fact, everyone in the courtroom, even those who are sent to judgment, will be like, this is justice. I don't like it, right? I'm mad about it, but God will always, that if this is true about who God is, that he'll always, in the end, he will now and in the end, when we sort of see the full picture, the full mosaic, will everyone, angels and demons, heaven and all those in heaven and hell will say, God is perfect. His ways are justice. He didn't do anything wrong here. And so maybe it causes us to lean more into God as opposed to how we understand all this goes on. It also, those, I do think, though, it should compel us to tell people about Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe, I wonder if sometimes by losing the aspect of hell, we can be a little bit like, oh, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I do think it presses on us to, like, people need to know.
Yeah, but I think even in that, there's a greater hope. Again, in the restoration of all things, and the existence of heaven and hell is towards that end.
Yeah.
And so, in order for all things to be restored, there is this judgment, this assessment of where things need to be, and whom and where people need to reside, such that in the end, again, all things are restored to the way that He intended them to be from the beginning. And again, when you think about the restoration of all things, I mean, and maybe you get into Old Testament scholarship, but the whole like tohu vavohu thing, the whole formless and void in the beginning. And when you think about that chaos and God bringing order to chaos, when you think about the prequel to that chaos, you go, as far as we understand it, we go, oh, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, if that's a summary statement and the rest of that chapter is still in some sense a bit of a summary, chapter 2 then gets into a little bit more detail. And then chapter 3, again, where did that serpent come from? And how is there a spirit in him that's crafty? And like, where's that backstory from? Right. And then you get into Peter and some of these passages that speak to some of the spiritual things that we don't have a lot of detail on. Yeah. And so then when you come to the restoration of all things, you're going, oh, there's more to this story than I probably understand. And when God says, I'm going to make it all right through my son, when he comes back as judge, and then there's the other part as to whether or not we're going to come back with him. I'm not getting there. I'm just saying there is that part. When he says, I'm going to come back and set all things right, you know, those spirits and powers and principalities in the heavenly places that are at work sometimes in the sons of disobedience. When he said, I'm going to take all of that and put them in their place, and everyone else are going to live with me in forever joy. That's significant.
So the last part of the statement of faith speaks to the restoration of all things, which, you know, I feel like that's been, I didn't hear that as much. I heard more that don't go to hell, go to heaven when you die.
Right.
You know where you're going to spend eternity.
And, you know, one of my most dominant memories of growing up in church was all these rapture videos, and
Left Behind.
And, I have this very strong memory of, everyone lined up, and we're all standing on people are standing on clouds, and you're like in front of this desk, and they're coming up and they're like checking on the computer where they're like, you're going to heaven. And if you're going to heaven, like you go to the right and there's like a gate in clouds. And if you're going to hell, you go to the left and there's like this elevator that like descends into like red smoke. I mean, that scared the bejesus out of me.
Scared the hell out of you.
It made me want to, like, I think I prayed the prayer for the 10th time.
Just do it again.
Just to be sure.
Yeah.
So as I've grown in my faith, I think one of the things that's in the Bible that I'm thankful for, that's in our statement of faith, is, I like the way you put it, it's ultimately about new heavens and new earth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How does that strike you? Especially the point of new heavens and a new earth. What are the things that you think are important to draw out there?
I've been thinking, as I was preparing for this time, I've been thinking a lot about the already not yet part of our faith. And I think with the restoration of all things, you get at that. There's so much of that restoration is happening sort of among us now, right? We're seeing these peaks of the kingdom come and live and breathe. And then there's so much evil and heartache and anxiety and all that stuff kind of surrounding it. But I think what gives me hope, even in the midst of the hell conversation and all of that, is that those glimpses of the kingdom that we see kind of all around us. Yeah. Because I think that's what shows the heart of God. And yeah, I think it's just kind
Windows.
of that's
They're like windows into what God is doing,
Yeah.
or encouragement towards where we're going.
I think so. And I see that all the time as a parent. You know, you talk in trauma-informed care, you talk all the time about how structure is so important and authority is so important. And that authority is not always what we want, right? It's the structure that shows who's in charge. And I think God has given us that. He has shown us who's in charge. Yeah. And there's a really beautiful part of that. And I think we're seeing that now. And we're seeing that in these glimpses of the way that Christians care for the poor, or the way they fight for justice, or these, even just this morning at church, we were seeing these moments of people coming around families who are in heartache and praying over them. And there is an incredibly compelling beauty to that. And hell is to be taken seriously, but it's not as much of a motivator as that beauty is.
Yeah.
So
I like how what you're bringing out is this idea of new heavens, new earth, that like it's the practical, like the earth we're living in.
Yeah.
Like we're seeing a glimpse of, imagine that was true all the time and perfect and in harmony. Like that's what we're talking about here, which I think is easier for people to grab onto.
Yeah, I think it'd be much better if we used that kind of vision to motivate people. Like I remember, again, C.S. Lewis, who talked about really ultimately like we're far too easily pleased. Talked about us like acting like children who play with mud pies when you have like the vastness of the sea, and how we don't realize how we're so pleased by things that are so fleeting. And I wonder to what degree that challenges us to be much better at casting the vision of the restoration of all things, to say, imagine a day where, and not speak to such ethereal, intangible things, but to say, you remember when this thing happened in the world and how happy everyone felt? Imagine it was like that, like this much. Like, you remember when this happened on this day and things worked out the way it was supposed to? Remember when you put in some work and you got to the end of it and it worked? Like, imagine if you didn't even have to, imagine if that were just automatic. It was just normal, right? People weren't, unjustly tried or, unnecessarily killed. Or imagine a day where people, again, you get into like MLK, I have a dream type stuff. But just to think like, man, if we could get better at casting those kind of visions as opposed to using fear as a motivator because we know it works. But I feel like it's always temporary, as opposed to if you cast a vision, it tends to stick, and then every day you're thinking, yeah, but that thing can be better, right? Hope tends to last. I got a design friend, Alex Medina, shout out to him. And he used this quote, make new things until all things are made new. And it speaks to that sort of, the peaks, the sort of glimpses we get when people create things, when people say things, when people do things, the justice, the charity, the kind of work. We had Kit Danley here, and she's talking about moving into a neighborhood, and now people call church like it's really a haven in that neighborhood. And you go, imagine if that weren't hard. Like, imagine you move into a neighborhood and the moment you move there, it's just better. Yeah. Right. The moment you say something and it just changes. Like, you meet somebody and they're just like, there's not death, there's not pain. Yeah. You don't have C-sections. Like, birth is just normal. I'm dead shit. Like, the pain in childbirth. Imagine if you can have children that didn't hurt.
As a result of sin.
Like how that speaks to women to go, you can have children that doesn't hurt anymore. Like, imagine that day. And they go, yo, that's real? It's like, that's what the Bible. Heaven, you think? I'm just, but that's the thing. New heavens, new earth.
There's a lot to it.
I mean, again, I'm just saying. But just think about the day when, again, stuff doesn't hurt. Yeah. You fall and you're not breaking things. Bones don't break. Yeah. You don't get old. Like that idea, like, you don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
I was going to say too, I think one of the things, like, as I was thinking about this too, is just the part of sin, like just being in this sinful body. Like, we won't have to worry about sin, we won't have to worry about like just repeating those things. Like, I think about like Martin Luther, who would beat himself. Like, he's like, let me beat the sin out of me, and Paul, who's like, I've asked you a couple of times, like, take this from me. Like, those who are believers, there's I feel like, or at least for me, like, there are things that I do and I'm like, God, like, I just wish I have to constantly deal with this? There is it's an eternal hope. And so I'm looking forward to that part where sin will not have dominion at all. Like, sin won't even be relevant. And so anyway, not just the material things.
I think something when we focus only on the hell part concept, I think we focus then solely on the things we do that are wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And those are the things that send us to hell. But sin has infiltrated everything.
Yes.
So our entire world is broken. And I think childbirth is not, the pain in childbirth isn't because of that woman's individual sin.
Right.
It's because the presence of sin
exactly
in our world, right? It's because of the original sin.
Yeah.
But I think that's what the hope is it's not just ridding us of sin in our hearts, but it's setting everything right.
Yep.
It's a world that functions like it should. It's bodies that function
Exactly.
as they should.
Yeah.
And that's compelling.
Yeah. It's going to be great to look forward to. Jesus coming back. There'll be new heavens, new earth. Praise God. All right. Well, thank you guys. In the meantime, as John would say, let's love God and love people. See you soon.